Andrew Chen is a general partner at Andreessen Horowitz. I'll let you, give the pitch on Andreessen, but you sort of co-lead their new $600 million games fund. Before you were at Andreessen, you were a founder yourself. You also sort of merged that company into Uber. You ran Uber's rider growth product line, and then joined Andreessen 6 years ago.
That's right. Yeah, and I want to really thank Ian as well as the Fenwick team for having us, as well as being one of the primary sponsors and co-hosts for Tech Week, and it's been amazing to work together on that.
Yeah, no, so we might, there's so much to cover. We might have some time at the end for Q&A, we'll see. But for those of you who have not sort of followed Andrew, I would say read his Substack, listen to his podcast. He's incredibly insightful about artificial intelligence, about innovation, about gaming, really about sort of everything that is sort of at the core of what we're all trying to build, which is new companies and innovative solutions for the world. So really excited to sort of talk about things. We're going to cover a couple different topics. So we're going to sort of get Andrew's thoughts on the current state of AI. We're going to get Andrew's thoughts on investment opportunities in the space, his thoughts on companies that are succeeding or struggling on go-to-market strategies in the space. We're going to sort of dive a little bit into the New York ecosystem and gaming ecosystem, and then we'll sort of have some closing questions. So let me just kick it off with where are we, right? So ChatGPT launched a little over 18 months ago. It feels like a tsunami of change has started, but it still feels like early innings. So give us set the landscape for us right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think the most fascinating thing about the whole technology landscape here is many of you guys may know that a lot of the core research that went into AI really was in academia. In the 1970s, and it was really all these technologies which today it's so funny that there's this big bucket that's just AI, but there's a ton of research that went through many decades in order to bring to market, but it was really viewed even as recently as 3 or 4 years ago as almost like a deep tech kind of weird nerdy thing that was going to cost $50 million to get, by the way, what is the product that you're even trying to build, et cetera, et cetera. And then obviously this amazing moment with, that ChatGPT's given us, to really build, this whole movement around it. And so we're very, very, very early, in very early innings. And we've sort of viewed it as really a couple different S-curves, happening at the same time. And obviously the most important one is all the foundation model development. And we're seeing, a really interesting thing there of both the closed, LLM models as well as, Mistral, which is one of our portfolio companies, the open source models and Llama and others that are chasing along. We obviously now see in 2D and images so much work out of the Midjourney and Stability folks. And that feels like that's in really good shape. We maybe would have all been incredibly thrilled a year ago to be able to type in something into a text box and have this incredible image appear. But now it's kind of okay, all right. Well, but what else can you do? Now impress me with some video. Now impress me with some interactive stuff. And so I think what we're seeing is that. There's been a huge novelty effect, and we're going to get back to kind of what novelty effect really means in the case of all of us building technology products. But it also means that we're going to slowly fill out all the foundation model layer, because how many are we going to have, right? Are we eventually you run out of senses. So are we going to have 50 or 100 of them? Probably not. You could imagine there being maybe a dozen. Kind of core foundation model companies that are all incredibly valuable, that do music and 3D and 2D and video, and and maybe there's some additional specializations that become interesting companies, but we're gonna start to eventually hit some kind of consolidation point where that's happening. And so I think, and then by the way, going back to the regional thing a little bit, is that a lot of the foundational model work is kind of all over the place. Mistral's in Europe, and 11 Labs is in London, and a lot of this stuff is in the Bay Area. But the most exciting thing about it, I think, is the next S curve that comes on top of that, which is there's a joke that these days, like every startup is an AI startup. Like every deck is going to have at least a slide in there that they're doing AI or not. And that's great, but what that means is that there's a lot more founders and a lot more entrepreneurs that can take the work that's happening at the foundational layer and actually build, deep, verticalized products that really solve problems for customers. And I know people derisively will call these things like GPT wrappers or whatever, and then that's maybe that's true. Maybe there's a few that are like that, but I'm also just a strong believer in the power of specialization and really custom go-to-market motions and having an account manager and deep domain expertise. And I think that's going to unlock a lot of really, really interesting industries, whether you're talking about healthcare or real estate or finance or many of these other things. And so we're very early, I think, on that in that part of the S curve. And we have probably over half the firm at A16Z spending time funding all of these various areas, and so it's a very exciting time, and I think we have a lot of different guesses as to where the S curve is going to go, but wow, what a time to be in the tech industry, just as everything is changing.
Thank you. That's great. I think I was listening to one of your podcasts recently, I think with Mark Andreessen. And you were talking about how A16Z is really sort of leaning into, two things, really the open source movement as it relates to LLMs, and also the policy side of things to ensure that from a regulatory standpoint, there isn't sort of regulatory capture that might happen from a government standpoint that might sort of tilt the tide in favor of the large incumbents and hurt the startup company. So maybe you could sort of talk about those two things, sort of how you view and how A16 views sort of the relevance of open source and the importance of how our government and maybe the EU as well sort of approaches regulation to ensure that the startup companies have a fighting chance to innovate and succeed.
Yeah, that's right. Well, one of the points that Mark has made in the past is that the fact that the internet is an open platform, the fact that we are able to go and build these websites, and we have open standards and all that, it might be that is just it's a fluke, and the reason why you can say this is because look, at the dawn of computing, if you're looking at IBM and you're looking at OS 360, you're looking at the apps that were built on top of these big mainframe computers, that was a completely closed proprietary system. And when you got the the PC in everyone's homes, you got Windows and Intel, right? And they were owned by companies, and we got the internet. Okay, great. That's obviously fantastic, and everyone in this room has benefited from that. Everyone in the world has benefited from that. And then interestingly enough, with mobile, we went back to a duopoly, right, and controlled by companies. And so I think what that means to me is that the reality is that if we like open, if we like the ability for all of us as founders and entrepreneurs to be able to build new things, and not have a zillion gatekeepers at every turn, not have the ability where someone disagrees with something that you're doing in your app or one of your users is doing in your app and they delete it off the planet. If we think that that's important, then we need to believe in all of these open standards, and we need to actually fight for it and actually build it. It's not a given if you look at kind of the history of computing. And so what that means for all of us, and look, I mean, it's one of the reasons why A16Z and many of the folks that are organizing events this week, why we're doing Tech Week, is to create really a group of people that believes in tech and believes that it can be a force for good in the world, which we all know, but sometimes is not as well, I think, represented as it could be. And so I think when it comes to some of the regulatory bodies, I think look, it's a challenge because of a couple dynamics that are happening. The first dynamic is that tech I lived in the Bay Area starting in 2007, and tech was really this like kind of nerdy backwater thing that leave us alone. We're building, we don't need to like talk to anybody. But it just became such an important part of the ecosystem and the fabric that all of a sudden, the way that you implemented the Facebook news algorithm, or whatever, is actually an important like societal topic, right? And TikTok and all these other things. And so I think I think a lot of people were caught surprised by that, and I think on both sides, right? Both that tech got this powerful, but also frankly that maybe there could be opportunities to to help and to do good things overall. And so I think the challenge now has been with AI is that a lot of the folks that maybe felt like they were behind the curve on regulating social media now feel like, oh, there's a cool new thing to regulate and let's get ahead of the curve. We don't quite understand it yet. And again, we just spent the first 5 minutes of this talking about how early we are in the S curve. It's so early in the S curve, and yet like let's start making rules, okay? And I think it's just so challenging and so dangerous to do that. So I think and then the other big issue with this is drawing the distinction as we have as a firm of like big tech and little tech actually have different needs and interests. If you are one of the $1 trillion incumbents in the industry, actually, like a lot of regulation might benefit you a lot because you have just tons of people, tons of headcount, ready to go implement all these changes that are required. But if you're like many of the founders in this room, it is actually really tough and really difficult to actually comply with every little thing. And so it's going to slow you down. It's going to slow all this down. And so I think our view on it is let's really figure out, let's keep the innovation engine for America and the broader global economy alive, and let's do that by having a voice and telling our story of what an amazing thing that AI and Web3 and many of these other technologies can bring the world, and let's have a voice and let's really tell the story, and also with things like Tech Week, get everybody together to celebrate what we're all trying to build rather than sometimes some of the more negative things that we see in headlines.
Yeah, I think that's really super important. I feel like one of the drivers of the urgency of regulation is the techno-pessimists, right? And
doomers.
Right, the doomsayers, right?
Yes.
And so you've been on record, and so is your firm, of being very optimistic about the possibility of change and what technology can bring and what it has brought in the past and what it can bring in the future. So talk a little bit about that, because I do think that is a critical piece to ensuring that not only that like this community and the other communities thrive, right? But that the doomsayers do not sort of influence the regulators, right? To sort of overstep their bounds.
That's
and
right.
really diminish what is possible with innovation.
That's right. Yeah, and two things I'll say. So one of my favorite Twitter accounts and they have podcasts and a bunch of other things is called the Pessimists Archive. And what it is actually a collection of all these article clips, through the last 200 years of all the new technologies that have been invented and all the news headlines of people freaking out because, for example, some of these things will be so familiar, is that, for example, novellas, sort of short form fiction, write-ups, had to be invented, right? Because for a long time, if you had a printing press, you would just print Bibles, just like nonstop, and then you were printing pamphlets and other things that were mostly nonfiction in nature. And so the idea of having these like fiction, story-driven kind of things had to be invented. There's a whole industry of people, writing these things, and you'll find a headline that's like, well, if so many people are staring at these pages and imagine what their life could be like instead of living real life, this is so bad for society. And it's like, it reminded me all the things of Black Mirror, like what happens if, everyone stares at their phone, like what's gonna happen, and they have one for like bicycles. It's like, oh, if we let people, bike around, then all of a sudden all the young people are going to be dating each other, and like we're not going to be able to control who they date, and like isn't that going to cause the downfall of society? And so anyway, so it's just great. And so I think one of the interesting things is just following kind of this pattern that's existed for many years. And look, I mean, I think for us, we obviously there are laws, like if you are asking an LLM or one of these models to say something or do something that then allows you to commit a crime, you should obviously that should definitely be illegal. I think the interesting challenge is and the recent bill that's being discussed in California as an example is like, to what extent should you have laws that dictate things on tied to like how many parameters a model has or how it works or things like that. I think that's when you're like really reaching in and doing something that could potentially affect an industry that's really frankly in its infancy.
Yeah, and my trust in state regulators and
don't get me started on that. I'm trying to be nice.
Understand what a parameter is, right? Is very low.
No, I mean it's being written by staffers, right? And so I think the challenge is, like people are passing these laws that don't, nobody fully understands. And many of you who have watched the congressional hearings where they drag up, kind of various tech leaders and ask them questions about Wi-Fi codes or whatever, is just great, because it really tells you a little bit about like these are the folks that are regulating us. And actually one other kind of quick note on this: if you look at the U.S. stock market and you actually take out tech, from the market cap, and you compare that to Japan and you compare that to Europe, what you see is that a lot of the growth of the U.S. economy has fundamentally been driven by tech, and it's really like frankly like a treasure and a golden goose of the U.S. economy. And I would just hate to take one of these waves, one of these S curves, and right before we even figure out how it's going to add value to everyone on the planet to try and try to squeeze it too hard.
Yeah, no, that's great, and it is. I think it is so amazing that whenever there's sort of a question about America's leadership in the world, right? Here we have like the latest tech wave. It certainly seems like, even though it's early innings, that this is going to be a very dynamic change agent for the entire landscape. Whether you're sort of an AI native company or you're a company that just has to adapt to this technology, it's going to be incredibly impactful, and yet here we are leading again.
That's right. And look, if we're going to be talking about biotech or defense, look at all the drone warfare that's happening. If you're going to talk about finance, you're going to talk about social media. I mean, these are all things that are going to have AI ultimately underlaying, everything. And so I look at that and I'm like, wow, like this could change a lot of industries all at once. And the U.S. stands to be able to benefit, and like let's see where this can go. I mean, I think it's a very exciting time, and simultaneously, obviously, one where we need to be careful about what might happen.
Yeah, no, and a perfect pivot to the next topic. Let's put gaming aside, because we want to sort of do that separately. But talk about what you're excited about. Like, what do you see and what does Andrew Chen see as amazing opportunities to invest right now in companies that are AI native?
Yeah. So there's a great blog post that my colleague Chris Dixon did, and he runs the crypto team, and he had this framework that I just thought was so great, and it's really one for Web3, but I think it applies very, very well to AI as well. So what he said is, look, all of these technologies that are being built, you can easily classify them as being, weak form or strong form, okay? And and every flavor of technology, there's always a weak form version and a strong form version of it, and so an argument would be, oh well, if you're going to do internet payments, you're going to do PayPal. Okay, yeah, that's sort of weak form, internet payments. Strong form internet payments might be Bitcoin, right? And you can kind of go down the list and kind of make all these examples. And I think one of the things that we're seeing today is that we can kind of imagine, if you kind of use the word like co-pilot, for example, and you want to put it next to any industry, you can kind of imagine like what all these products are going to kind of look like. It's like, oh, well, actually, I mean, there's a bunch of companies working on legal right now.
Oh, yes. Probably some in this room.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And you look at that and you say, okay, cool, yeah, Copilot for lawyers. It's like, okay, cool. You can immediately imagine what that looks like, and we are excited about that. And I think those are interesting spaces. I think those are weak form though. Those are that's the like nice friendly version, because you're kind of saying, okay, well, it's going to help everybody in the existing kind of incumbent like industries. And I think the more interesting question is, what does the strong form of all these technologies look like? And I want to use a quick example of this, which is if you look at video on the internet, you might have said kind of in the early days that there was a company called Brightcove. And this was based in Boston many years ago. And the idea was, okay, let's just take video that's already been captured for TV and movies, et cetera, and let's host it on the internet. And here's a bunch of infrastructure that helps you do that. Okay, that's great. That's the weak form version of video. There's a reason why we don't hear about this company very much anymore. The strong form is like YouTube, which is, okay, let's just let anybody upload anything, and it can be any length, and let's just see what happens. And if you were in Hollywood, you might have said, oh no, these guys are going to go and they're going to build, they're going to disrupt Hollywood and they're going to make TV shows and this and that. Turns out they're not. They're actually going to make cooking videos and travel vlogs and like unboxing. I mean, if you told me that there would be, millions of hours of unboxing content on the internet and that people actually want to watch that, like that's shocking. That's shocking. But that is the strong form version of what it is. So I think in a lot of these cases, it's like we'll see a pitch that's like the AI dating app, and it's going to make it so that people can chat with each other on the thing, and that's a cool weak form version. And then there's the strong form version that's like AI girlfriend or boyfriend or slash whatever, and it's going to be a digital companion, and it's actually going to be more engaging and interesting to talk to than a human. And like those are the ones that I think are the ones that can potentially break out into entirely new markets, and I think that's really fascinating. So we could go through each industry and kind of say, okay, what's the weak form version? What are the strong form versions? I'm always so attracted to like the strong form versions, because that it might take a little while to figure out, but then if it works, it can really change things. So I think that's good framework to go with.
Yeah, and so how do you think about and how do you talk to either your portfolio companies or founders that you're getting to know and thinking about making investment, about how they're positioning their business, and maybe it's weak form, strong form, but also like how do you think about the large LLMs' ability to hoover up the next set of applications, right? Which seems to be like a thing in this sort of very early stages of this sort of AI wave, is that all of a sudden next thing OpenAI does something, and a lot of businesses that people thought that they could build just disappear.
Right.
And how do you think about that, and how would you advise a founder to, whether it's building a moat or sort of building a different business that has some protection against that issue?
Yeah, that's right. Well, I think so the first thing is to just say this as positively as possible is like right now this age of this new wave of AI apps is awesome because of the novelty effect that it's bringing to the market. And what that means is that if you look at all these products, just the growth rate, if you just announce a new AI app, the growth rate of getting to your first 1 million users and then to your first $1 million of revenue, I mean, we're seeing companies do this in weeks right now, and which is amazing. And so that is like at its core, I've spent a lot of my time in previous companies helping them on distribution and thinking about viral growth and all these other things. I mean, it is amazing to have such a strong novelty effect kind of across the whole space, across hundreds of products, that you just have incredible top of funnel immediately. And so I think it is an amazing time to take advantage of that. And for a lot of these startups that I'm working with to have an AI angle to what they're doing so that they can sort of ride this wave. It is very, very hard. This is a point that Mark Pincus, who's founder of Zynga, often makes. It's very, very hard to create your own waves. What founders need to do, and by the way, like things like VR, give you an example of like you can spend $10 billion a year, and it's incredibly hard to make that into a thing. Whereas we're all surfing the AI wave right now, and part of that is embracing the fact that It's an amazing, top of funnel, engine, and the investors have their wallets out, and everyone's excited, et cetera, et cetera. Now the challenge, of course, is, you're gonna have like the small fish, being chased by a slightly larger fish, being chased by, another fish, which is that the folks that are basically building, fine tunes on these existing models. If there's if GPT 4.0, comes out, all of a sudden all the fine tunes that you did on GPT 3 maybe not so good. And so you're always kind of trying to create enough delta. And then on top of that, funny enough, for all the closed source guys, all the open source LLMs are like chasing them, and they're only, they're probably three to 6 months, behind at any given point, right? And so you're just seeing a very, very dynamic environment. And so I think if you think about what is it that is actually going to be required to be ultimately very, very, to make your product very sticky? So you're going to onboard a bunch of users, that's going to be relatively easy. And then it's a question of, okay, well, what do you do to make things sticky beyond that? I think you have to then look at, it becomes a little bit old school, right? It's either you know their business so well, you're so far into their workflows, you've sold into Fenwick, Fenwick is adopted, and as a result of that, there's just an enterprise motion that can be very, very strong, and that might be the enterprise version of this. And then the other, the more consumer-y version would be, if you're building collaboration tools, you're building these apps, you have to want to use a product because all your coworkers use the product, the way that Slack and Zoom work, or the way that social app works. And so I think those are I think right now there's a lot of novelty effect. It's generating tons of top of funnel, and then I think the stickiness is just going to be, more basic things that we've had for a long time. And so I think things are so exciting on, watching things emerge on social media that we often don't talk about what the retention statistics kind of look like after, the Big Bang launches. And I'll tell you, as someone that actually gets to see a lot of this data, a lot of it is not good. A lot of it is, if you look at day 30, how many folks are still using these products, it's not great. However, the folks that can get paid subscribers, that retention looks much stronger. And so I think you got to lean into that.
Yeah, it's actually something that we're seeing and experiencing very much as a law firm, right? So just like any other business, we're being sold into in a meaningful way. I do think that legal is clearly an area that AI can and will be very impactful. But lawyers, just like lots of other professionals, are tricky animals. Habit change is very hard. We'll experiment with a variety of things. It's hard to make those things stick and make people change. And I think what ultimately will yield real results is figuring out how to cater to different kinds of lawyers, how to build a user interface that works with how they work, right, in their workflow in a way that feels comfortable to them and in a way that actually really moves the needle in a meaningful way, right? And that's what we have been sort of looking at a variety of different legal tech products that we're sort of actively experimenting with. That's kind of what we're searching for, and I'd imagine other businesses are doing the same. And so I think the tip for the founders that I speak to, regardless of whether they're selling into law firms or whether they're selling somewhere else, it's a similar thing to what you're saying, right? It's you got to sort of figure out how to get the fit right for who you're actually trying to provide a leverage.
That's right, and I imagine in your world, there's a bunch of compliance requirements, there's a bunch of, security things, and trying to make sure, and those are great for these very vertical companies to lean into. And I think there's gonna, I think the tough thing is gonna be, there's gonna be a whole kind of middle of companies that could kind of help you guys, but but they're not quite fully customized for the legal, kind of profession, and so, and then in that case, as the market kind of evolves, they may find themselves, very much squeezed, for that. So I think some of the most dangerous, sort of investments in my eyes are often the ones where you're talking about a very horizontal, thing. You're going to be the fifth or sixth player in this niche of being able to generate, video clips. It's really hard for those these hyper-competitive. In these hyper-competitive markets, I think for the horizontal players to survive. So I think you got to go very, very verticalized, unless you have a shot to be kind of number one or number two.
Yeah. So I'm curious, I mean, you've been an investor for 6 years, right? So you were an investor in many portfolio companies that existed before this AI wave. I'm curious, like, how you're seeing the successful portfolio companies, right, that were non-native AI, right, but had to then figure out, like, what do they do, right? Like, how do they actually adapt their business in different ways? Everyone needs an AI strategy of some sort. What are you seeing the successful portfolio companies that are not AI native do to sort of adapt to the AI world and stay competitive?
Yeah. Well, I think I think one of the hardest parts for these companies that have been around for, let's say 5 years, and then all of a sudden you have this AI wave, is that de facto everything that the temptation will be to make everything in their product strategy and their product roadmap ultimately be a weak form implementation. Because it's so hard to think about your product that you have that all of your customers like, et cetera, and then for you to really sit down and think, okay, if I were to do this from scratch today, what would I actually do? And so I think what tends to be the easiest, I mean, to touch on game studio companies for a second, what's very easy for folks like that to grok is like, okay, I'm building a game, it's gonna cost tens of millions of dollars, I'm gonna give my artists this like co-pilot thing, and then as a result of doing that, they're gonna be able to make their 3D models 50% cheaper. Like that is like they can just understand that. And I think everyone that is in an industry where there are these weak form products should just go adopt them. And I think that's fine. I think the challenge is to get them to think kind of originally as we're talking about of like, okay, no, if you were to start the company again, disrupt yourself. Like, would you actually make your home screen the way it is? Would you actually make your, kind of primary interaction? Would you actually make it, what you set out to be, or would you kind of change it dramatically? And a good example of this, I'm on the board of a company called Substack, and Substack's a wonderful company, allows people to publish a newsletter, and I write a newsletter on there. And one of the things that I love about what Chris Best, who's the CEO there, has done is he's hosting hackathons like every month right now, getting his team, to build like little plugins and what do we change about kind of like the product experience, and just experimenting. And he himself is like building on top of all of these kind of various LLMs to see what's actually possible and to really bring and now he has a bunch of awesome ideas of you can imagine if you have a lot of text as Substack does, and they also have podcasting, and they can do transcripting, and they can do a bunch of stuff with video, like that's all very, very interesting. And maybe there should be a writing co-pilot, and maybe there should be, he has all these ideas that are kind of based on that. And I think it's still early enough in the S-curve where a lot of companies are able to adopt. And if you look at the mobile wave, which sometimes this AI wave is kind of compared to, for a lot of folks, it took them years to actually adopt mobile, and for some folks, it ended up being fine. Like LinkedIn's a good example. They were mostly a web property, Airbnb, same thing, mostly a web property, primarily benefiting from SEO, and they took a couple extra years to build their mobile app, and ended up being fine. The challenge is if you're in one of these markets that on mobile where you were AOL Instant Messenger, or you were ICQ, or you were one of these, and then WhatsApp is about to appear, like it's actually existential for you, right? And so I think one of the interesting parts will be just looking at what particular product category that you're in, and how existential would it be, to have an incumbent. And if you're in, for example, content creation tools, or you're in video, if you're Adobe, of course you have to be, you have to turn that battleship like immediately because of what's about to happen.
Yeah. So you brought up gaming. So let's pivot to gaming, right? Talk about speedrun, right? This is sounds amazing, right? For those unfamiliar, right? This is I think 30 to 40 companies that you're sort of bringing in a very early stage investments at the cross section of sort of games and AI and technology. So talk a little bit about what are you trying to accomplish there? Which is a very different strategy than what I would imagine would be a typical strategy.
Yeah. So look, I think if you look at this is a little bit, many of you follow Andreessen Horowitz in the news, but one of the most interesting things that A16Z has been doing over the last couple of years, when I joined the firm, it was under 100 people. all of us went to Menlo Park and sat around a table every day on Sand Hill Road, and it was a very like traditional, firm. And it's amazing that 6 years later how different it is. And we have offices in New York, and we're opening our new LA office soon. And we obviously have our SF office. We have one we have one in London. And the structure of the funds has also been changing as well. So rather than having one central kind of venture fund that kind of does everything, what we've been doing is we've been building these vertical funds. So there's a bio fund, a crypto fund, a gaming fund, that's us. There's American Dynamism, which was just launched as well this year, headed by two of my favorites, Catherine Boyle and David Yulovich. And so the really interesting thing about building these vertical funds is you're often, maybe a good question to start with is like, why even build a vertical fund? Why not just do the investments out of the main fund? And I think what we ended up realizing and deciding is that, look, like a lot of these industries, and American Dynamism is a good example, and gaming is a good example, and crypto is a good example, they're just their own ecosystems. They have their own conferences, their own alumni networks, their own kind of constellation of important companies, and so you build a vertical fund in order to go into these ecosystems and really plant the flag and build it out in a way to be able to tell the entrepreneurs, like, hey, this is not just like a onesie-twosie investment, into the sector. Like we are here. We're going to build multiple funds. We're going to hire a full-time team. All we care about is your space, and so because of that, that's the commitment that we have to your company as well, right? And so for gaming, we started it, for a bunch of different reasons. One of the main reasons is that we sort of see it as the next major social network paradigm, right? If you go back and you look at what teenagers and kind of young people are doing with their time, they're playing Minecraft, they're playing Roblox, they're playing Fortnite. A lot of the most interesting things that are happening from a consumer standpoint, just overall, touch gaming, whether you're talking about streamers and influencers, or you're talking about esports or any of these. So what we did was, when we kicked off the Games Fund, we sort of thought, okay, let's go invest in all the known amazing founders. So we went and invested in Nate Mitchell, who's the co-founder of Oculus and his new company. We invested in Chris DeWolf, who founded Jam City and MySpace in his new company. We went and invested in the creators of League of Legends and World of Warcraft and like all these amazing founders. But we also sort of thought, okay, this is great, but like, what about all the like college students that are gonna like build something in their dorm room? What about all the folks that are super early in their career? Like, how do we, if they have an amazing insight, how do we invest in those people? And so to answer your question, with Speedrun, we sort of thought this is an amazing opportunity for us to tell the world, like, we are investing, we're very happy to be first money in. You don't have to have a product. You can literally just have some slides, or like a sketch of an idea. We'll invest and be first money in. And so to give you guys a sense of it, in the last batch, when we announced that this was going to happen, we had 4,000 companies apply. We have interviewed 400 of them ish, and we start with a 10 to 15 minute interview, and then we kind of dig in from there. And then we're going to fund roughly 40 of those companies. And it's a super, super exciting thing. And not only do we do that, and it's not all gaming companies, it's actually AI and infrastructure, and it's gamified kind of consumer apps, like kind of the Duolingos and Twitches and that kind of thing of the world. But after we're done with all that, it's great because we also then get to share all of these companies with our favorite seed investors and angel investors and VCs, and really use these demos days as a way to like really collect all the important people in the ecosystem and bring everybody together and like build the ecosystem together, right? And that's been the thinking with all. So we have a demo, we have a accelerator program. The crypto team actually has one called CSX that's running in London right now, and I'm sure this will only expand in the future.
Yeah, what I love about that is it gets back to the whiteboard example that you were using before, right? Funding and incentivizing entrepreneurs at the very beginning of their journey to think differently about the ecosystems that you're focused on, right? And they can, with sort of the AI wave and sort of different aspects of how that might change the gaming industry in this example, right? They can actually look at something and create entirely new games or entirely new way of gaming.
That's right. That's right.
Like,
That's right.
I think in your podcast with Mark recently, right? I think Mark was talking about how he plays games with his sons, and then he was sort of pontificating about what games might be,
Yes.
and how we think about games in a certain way. And I think at one point he said, "Well, a game might last like 5,000 hours or something like something crazy." But who knows, right? If you sort of are able to start with a completely clean slate, you can have some incredible innovation.
That's right. And I think it really is the founders that are like 6 months ahead of the investors, and then the investors are maybe, a couple months ahead of like kind of the press and kind of mainstream, kind of tech, because, and it really comes down to like the founders that are out there that are closest to all the trends and all the new technologies. Like they're the ones that tell us where the world is going to go. And so, I always feel enormously privileged to be the recipient of all the knowledge.
Yeah. So I'm curious, like where you see sort of the intersection of gaming and where you live right now in LA, right? Because gaming is usually like pretty far ahead of where entertainment is. But AR, VR, AI, games, social, all of those things eventually sort of intersect with the entertainment world.
That's right. That's
and
right.
have a real influence over that. So how do you sort of envision what that future might hold, and where those two industries might be sort of heading together?
Yeah, so I think we're seeing a lot of kind of, I think gaming, it's such an interesting audience, because there's a lot of people who are actually spending a lot of money playing and a lot of time gaming, but would never identify as a gamer. That's a very kind of, and that's where all the market growth is actually happening. Is like people playing Wordle and like, your folks that love doing crossword puzzles or Sudoku, and then they'll say, no, but I'm not a gamer, right? Because they think of that as like first-person shooters and all that. And so I think one of the things that we're seeing is just this amazing rapid expansion of gaming, touching all of these adjacent sectors. So many of you may have seen recently that there was an analysis of all the time that's being spent in the New York Times properties. And the graph is amazing because it's like the New York Times, .com kind of news section it's like pretty flat. And there's a section that's like New York Times games, and it's like every year it was growing and growing and growing and growing. And this last year was the first year where it's actually the majority of minutes being spent on the New York Times is in gaming, not the news property. So so the argument in this chart is like, look, this is getting added into the New York Times bundle. It's the majority of minutes already. And it might be that in 5 years, we're going to think of the New York Times as a gaming company that happens to have like this weird, news division. Like this thing that I used to read, like, did you know they actually used to print these things out? It's like crazy. So that's like one flavor. And then, Netflix has a huge gaming effort that's happening. They have 9 studios. If you open up the Netflix app on your mobile phone, you'll see it's part of your subscription. Look, for them, it's like, if you're going to spend $100 million on a show, you can spend, a couple chunks of $20 million, checks to license games and put them in the app, and then people will burn through all the content, and that's an amazing value prop for what they're trying to do. Amazon Prime, they have gaming in their bundle, and there's Apple Arcade, and like on and on and on. So I think you're seeing this really interesting thing where all the media companies are starting to bundle in gaming, and I think that's going to expose a lot of folks. And then the other interesting thing is just in popular culture. I mean, over the last 18 months, we had the Last of Us TV show, the Fallout TV show on Amazon's doing quite well. And then we also saw things going the other direction, which is like, Harry Potter going to a video game, Hogwarts Legacy, which made hundreds of millions of dollars. And many other examples. So I think it's a very exciting time to see the convergence of the whole industry. I think it is mostly, interestingly enough, I've had a lot of conversations, living in LA, I live in Venice, just chatting with folks that are from all the various large entertainment companies. I would say they're mostly scared by technology. It's mostly like defensively kind of in that culture, because they're, and AI has been at the focus of actually some of the strikes as well from writers and so on, in this, because they want to basically actually try to get people to sign contracts that say you are not allowed to use virtual AI voice actors you know, in your video games, or you're not allowed to, you know, use music that's like kind of sampled. So I think we're seeing a lot of that there. But I think, look, the entertainment industry, if you just look at all the minutes, people are watching fewer and fewer TV shows. They're watching more short form clips. They're playing more video games. I mean, like, this is where like all entertainment is going, and underlying it is software, because gaming is software. You know, these short form video platforms are software, and so I think in the tech industry, we certainly will benefit and be able to drive the agenda on many of these things.
Yeah, that's. I'm going to use the New York Times. What, full disclosure, their client, and we did.
Are they?
And we did the Wordle acquisition. So you're welcome.
That was a great acquisition.
I didn't do it. My colleagues did.
What a great acquisition.
Great acquisition. So you're welcome, Wordle fans. But I'm going to use that as just a way to, as we begin to kind of wrap up, pivot back to New York and talk about what you see as sort of unique and special about this community, and where you see like the most interesting investment opportunities or the ability to build businesses in New York that might be unique from other ecosystems.
Yeah. So, you know, the Bay Area is great at what it does, and it has been dominant in the past and will remain dominant kind of forever. Now, I think what's interesting though is, for a long time, it wasn't clear what the number 2 tech ecosystem was going to be. You know, is it LA? Is it Austin? Is it Seattle? Is it New York? Is it London? Like, what is it? I think post COVID, it's very clearly, if you're not going to be in the Bay Area, you're going to be in New York. I mean, I think that's super obvious. Like, that is facts now. And so I think that has created a really interesting gravitational pull within New York to be able to access Europe, to be able to access the rest of the East Coast, and what it means is that, you know, because New York is close to all of these very important industries, whether you're talking about finance or government or, you know, much of world trade, it's just a really exciting place to build companies that touch those areas. If you're going to build a foundational model company, yeah, probably better. You should probably do that in San Francisco. And if once you start hiring engineers, you're going to be forced to go out there. But for all these other sectors, I think it's very exciting. And one of the big things for Tech Week that we've been thrilled by is when we organized SF, LA, and New York last year, combined it was 700 events overall. And in New York this week is combined it was 1,000 overall, and in this week in New York it's 700, right? And it just tells you, how deep the ecosystem is, that you can have, this much going on. And when you look at the calendar, it's like every single industry, tons of different companies, and we'll crunch the numbers later. But I think a tremendous percentage of people actually traveled to come to New York because it is such a destination, and that's the kind of thing that it's just much harder to imagine folks going to some of these other cities. And so I think it's the last couple of years have played out very, very well for the New York tech ecosystem.
I mean, this, again, from just last October, which was the first New York Tech Week, to now, right? So less than a year, it's incredible, like how much this event has grown. Yeah. And as we've talked about before, the thing that I think is really innovative about what you've and the rest of the Andrew Chen team have built with the Tech Weeks, right, is you've allowed creativity to be the driver of what and where this event can go, and haven't sort of given it constraints. So it sort of like touches back to some of these.
Well, most conferences are closed,
right?
And this is open, right?
That's right.
So it's very much in our ethos.
You haven't really sort of constrained the creativity of the community, right? Instead of doing that, like having it at a particular venue with a set agenda, how you might be a speaker or not be a speaker, really like in a way that you've talked about building your companies, right? And building different ecosystems, right? What you've done here with Tech Week, which I think is amazing, is really just allowed the communities to sort of drive that engagement in all different ways.
That's right. Yeah, and maybe my final plug on the Tech Week thing is, for those of you that are in doing something B2B and you're selling into either the startup ecosystem or SMBs and so on, the cool thing about organizing one of these events is you basically get it onto the calendar, and you'll walk away with a lead list of potentially thousands of emails and people that are interested in the topic that you've created. Now, sometimes you have to turn away a lot of people, and you can just host whatever your venue accommodates. But it's really like, I think, a no-brainer for anybody that is doing stuff in B2B to host. And like, we intend to, you know, there's a whole team that's working on it these days. Rose in the blue jacket is one of them, and I think there's a couple other folks here. But you know, we intend to continue expanding this and do this over multiple years, and would love to, you know, partner with all of you for this Tech Week and beyond.
Amazing. I think we could wrap it up there. So, do you want to take a question or two?
No, let's go.
Okay.
Let's go.
Yeah, okay.
I think that's a good close.
I think that's a good close. Yeah. So look, let's have a big round of applause for Andrew. And a big round of applause for his team at Andreessen Horowitz for putting together an amazing Tech Week. Thank you, everybody. Cocktails.
Thank you.